Well, we're 1 minute after 12, and so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to this wonderfully international audience. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Kate Paisani, and I work at CARLA, and this is our last CARLA presentation of the semester. But don't despair. If you want to engage in professional development from CARLA, there's still a chance. We have a workshop on Saturday, April 12th, and there's still some spots available for that. And we also have our upcoming CARLA Summer Institute program. And Karen is putting links in the chat right now where you can find more information about both the workshop and the Summer Institute program. So we are really excited today to welcome back Elaine Tarone and Bonnie Swierzbin. Elaine is a Professor Emerita from the University of Minnesota, and she was my predecessor as the director of the Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition. And Bonnie is a very experienced but now retired ESL teacher who worked at both the University of Minnesota and as a teacher educator at Hamline University. And they have done a reboot of a project, of a book project that they had that is now, I guess we can say, a CARLA project. That they're going to talk to you about today. And so before I hand things over to them and give you the title of their talk, I just want to let you know that the chat is open. We will use the chat for Q&A. So any questions that you have, please pop them in there and I will ask your questions to Bonnie and Elaine at the end of the talk. The title of their talk today is Learner Language, Tools for Teachers 2.0. Welcome, Bonnie and Elaine. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to start out on the first few slides, and then Bonnie is going to take over. I want to start out by saying where you can find this 2.0 new version of Exploring Learner Language. You can click on the URL, and that's in the chat as well. Or you can go to the main website here, click on publications, the way Bonnie is right there, and there will appear some yellow boxes, and there it is, Exploring Learner Language. So that is our new Learner Language 2.0. We'll go on to the next slide. So many moons ago, when I first started teaching in high school, I asked an older teacher in the teacher's lounge, "What do you teach?" And I expected the answer to include mention of students, for example, freshmen or sophomores, or subject matter, for example, math or French. And instead, the teacher said, "I teach Lotto." In other words, I teach the book. And in this approach, there's a set syllabus in the book, focusing on set forms and functions in a set order. And the job of the teacher is to simply voice the book, read it out loud. Learners memorize the items, rehearse them exactly. And the goal of this approach is for learners to be able to perform rehearsed material accurately on a test. You might refer to this as teaching to the test. Next. This is, in fact, the teach the book approach is passive, like a pre-planned trip where content is presented on a set agenda, one size fits all. You just show up, follow directions, there's no surprises, it's boring. The result is that such learners can only, most of the time, they can only use the language in predictable role-play situations in the classroom or in response to highly rehearsed questions. However, we take a different approach. Based on decades of SLA research on second language acquisition, we recognize that teachers have an internal syllabus. We don't teach the syllabus in the book. We're teaching to the learner's syllabus and the language they need for unrehearsed interactions with others. Their learning syllabus is active when they're trying to use the target language. Can you go back, Bonnie?
Yep, sorry.
Thanks. I'm just reading off the bullets, but in unrehearsed interaction. And in a way, this is a kind of ongoing needs assessment focusing on where they are in the syllabus, what they know, and what they need to learn next. And the goal of this more active approach is that learners can use the language intelligibly and with increasing accuracy in a growing range of unrehearsed interactions. Okay, next. So we view the acquisition of a second language as an active and interesting exploration where individuals contribute to daily goal setting with others to decide what and how they learn. This active approach requires specialized teacher expertise, knowledge, tools, and skills, and the wisdom to use that knowledge and skill to track the parameters of learner language as it develops over time. As part of exploratory practice, this puzzle-solving approach is far from boring. It's exciting and even exhilarating. So, how do teachers and researchers learn the skills and tools they need to take this more active approach? Almost 20 years ago now, hard to believe, I was video recorded as I reviewed some of the questions that teachers might have in taking this active approach, teaching to their learners' internal syllabus, questions that they might be able to answer for themselves using the Explorer Learner Language materials. So let's play that video.
I'm trying. It seems to be taking its sweet time.
It's all right. I had my doubts about this.
Let me go back and click on the link again.
Okay. If not, we can go on. It's very unsettling to see a 20-year-old younger version of yourself talking in front of you. Ah, there she is. Good job, Bonnie.
Hi, and welcome to our exploration of learner language. You know, it's fascinating to take the time to really pay attention to the way learner language develops. No matter what sequence is followed by a teacher or a textbook in presenting language structures, learners seem to have their own built-in syllabus. What they learn is different from what we teach. Let's listen to the English that's spoken by Rodrigo. He's a beginning level learner just graduated from a Mexican university.
The most important is right, and I don't know, grammar maybe, but no is good, and Mexico no is good.
So why did Rodrigo say no is good? In Mexico, no is good. His books and his teachers surely did not say it that way. Is it because of his native language, Spanish? Sometimes we say that language learners have an accent from their native language. For example, their pronunciation may be different. Listen now to Jeanne, a native speaker of French, as she describes a photo of a house. How would you describe her pronunciation?
The back of the house got a small garage, and there is tree around the house, and that's it.
As a more advanced speaker of English, Jeanne's pronunciation is really pretty good, but she does still have problems with one word, house. She says, house. Why would a simple sound like huh prove to be such a problem for her? Now, if you think you know the answer to that one, consider this. In the next segment, you will hear Chun, Katrine, and Antonio, native speakers of Chinese, French, and Spanish, use the same incorrect word order when they ask English questions.
Is the man a student?
Yes, he is a student.
Why the bus driver can't stop for him?
Why this guy stop?
He's waving at him.
How can native speakers of such different native languages be in such agreement about how to incorrectly ask English questions? Their books and their teachers did not ask questions this way. So where did this pattern come from? Sometimes learners do learn from their teachers. Listen to Shui when she runs into problems finding the right English vocabulary word.
It seems like he wants to hide what he is doing.
He's hitchhiking.
Yeah, hitchhiking.
Hitchhiking, right?
So a teacher has taught Shui a new vocabulary word, hitchhiking. Do you think she knows it now? And do you think she'll know it tomorrow? What can a teacher do to help her remember? We can learn a lot when we take the time to pause and look at learner language. Your insights are unique and important. Join us in our exploration of learner language.
So here again are some of the questions that teachers and researchers are going to be addressing as they use the materials in the website. Where are the learners? Where are my learners in my class on their language learning journey? What does their unrehearsed speech tell you about their interlanguage rules? Do those rules derive from their native language, overgeneralization, or what? What parts of the second language do they know, and what do they need to learn next? And what communication tasks, scaffolding, or corrective feedback can the teacher provide to facilitate the language learning process? Now, in theory, classes on second language acquisition provide the skills and tools that are needed to address these questions, but SLA classes tend to be lectures. What they often need is a lab component so that the participants in the classes can actively learn those tools. Some SLA lecturers do ask their classes to find their own learners to study, but this is logistically often very difficult and time-consuming. So our intent in creating the Exploring Learner Language site, both 1.0 and now 2.0, is to provide a lab for people who are learning about second language acquisition. It's one that features some of the learners you just saw on the video recording. 6 learners of English as a second language. Their first languages are Spanish. There are 2 speakers from Francophone Africa, whose dominant language in English appears to be French, and Mandarin Chinese. We video recorded all of them doing the same 6 oral tasks, which you'll see soon. We transcribed their speech, and we showed different ways to analyze their learner language. So now I want to review with you these lab materials as they're presented on the CARLA website. So this is what you see. If you scan down, you will see an outline. And here are the sections. In the intro, if you click on that, you get an introduction in which you will find detail on the learners and a description of all the tasks that the learners performed, including their instructions. You can go back. We really don't. We'll be looking at these in detail later. And then the video you just saw. Then there are chapters. Chapters 2 to 7 show different ways to analyze the learner language. Each chapter contains exercises to engage learners in analysis, as well as to explore puzzles that are related. For example, and we don't need to look at this, Bonnie, right now, but in chapter 5, there's an exercise 5.3 that we've used a lot and that you'll mention later. But in that exercise, you watch as a learner repeatedly produces an erroneous word in spite of Bonnie's repeated patient follow-up of the correct word over and over. Why doesn't she hear the correct form? And then why, several minutes later, after no previous intervention, does she suddenly produce that problem word correctly? That's an example of the kinds of puzzles that we try to engage in these chapters. Chapter 8 reviews Dick Allwright's framework of exploratory practice. And then under additional resources, if you click on that, you will see that we provide a discussion of some of the answers to the exercises, a bibliography, a glossary, and then copies of the task prompts should you wish to print them out and use them yourself to gather your own data. A list follows of all of the video segments. We did transcribe all of the oral language that was produced, and those appear here. Transcripts of every word you will see on the screen to the interviewer or to one another, as well as written narratives, where at the end of each set of oral tests, we ask each learner to write out one of those narratives. So now we're going to go back to the slides. That's what you're going to find on the website, and you can explore that on your own. Next slide. So now we're going to meet the learners, and I'm going to introduce you to them in a little more detail. First two are Rodrigo and Antonio. They're Spanish-speaking brothers, they're our lowest proficiency learners, with 5-year law degrees from a university in Mexico City. They've studied English 2 to 3 years in high school, but their proficiency is still rather low. That said, they're older and more highly educated than the other learners. Next.
We should point out that these names are all pseudonyms.
Yes, I forgot to say that. Thank you, Bonnie. Yes, these are pseudonyms.
In fact, we've referred to them this way for so long that we've forgotten their real names, I'm sorry to say.
Mm-hmm. Next, 2 learners from the People's Republic of China, 1st and 2nd year students on a 1-year exchange program. They were living with a host family in the suburbs. Next, we have Jean and Catherine from Francophone Africa. They also spoke Lingala and Swahili. They'd been in the US about 18 months, living with their families in the suburbs and attending either high school or community college. So those are the learners. And now Bonnie's going to show you the communication task that we asked these 6 learners to complete on camera. Bonnie?
Thank you. So we asked the learners to complete 6 oral tasks and 1 written task. Each task was designed to elicit different language features and find out how the learners responded in various situations. In the interview task, I asked about their language learning history to get past tense forms and some things about their present situation to get present tense verb forms. There was also a point in each interview where I indicated I didn't understand something they said, whether I did or not, just to see how they would respond, and offered an implicit correction and used the word siblings, a word that we felt they probably wouldn't know, just to see, again, how they would respond to that. In the narrative task, the learners were asked to imagine that they had seen the events in a set of pictures shown here, that they had seen it and I hadn't, and to tell me what happened. And then afterwards, they were asked to write the narrative that they had told me. Those 2 narrative tasks were designed to see how the learners tracked the characters. There's 3 female characters in these pictures, so you can't just get away with pronouns by themselves. So how do they refer to and track the actions of each character? And I should mention here that we also had 2 native speakers of English complete all the tasks except the interview to help give us an idea of what language native speakers might produce for these tasks. And I would say that was quite insightful. We were really glad we did that. 2 more tasks were the question task in which each learner had to ask me questions about a set of 6 pictures in order to understand an incident that had taken place. And then in the retell task, to tell the story back to me from start to finish. So here's a couple of the snowy day images used for both of those tasks. And these are available to you on the website should you choose to use them for with your own students. The last 2 tasks are the jigsaw task and the comparison task, where the learners worked in pairs. So this is more like a classroom activity. In the jigsaw task, each learner had a photo of a different house but couldn't see the other person's photo. And they were told that they could describe their photo or ask questions about the other photo, with the goal being to find 3 things that were the same and 3 things that were different about the 2 houses. Then in the comparison task, we put both photos on a table where both learners could see them. The photos were side by side, and asked them to talk about who might live in each house. Specifically, we asked, how many people do you think live there? What do you think their social class is? Are these typical houses in Minnesota? What do these kinds of houses tell you about American culture? These last 2 tasks elicited some very interesting interaction and language structure, which I will talk about further in just a minute. So, learner language can be analyzed in at least these 5 different ways. I mean, there's so many ways you can look at it. Most of the ways are reviewed in detail in SLA textbooks, such as the uses, limitations, and difficulties of error analysis, target-like use analysis, TLU, which a lot of you probably have used in your classes, developmental sequences for things like negation and questions, tracking participants and their actions and narratives. And each way of analyzing language is tied to a particular SLA theory, but language teachers and teacher educators need a choice of ways to look at learner language, and our material provides that. We discovered some fascinating interactions that have really led to thoughtful discussions with teachers in training, such as the implicit feedback that Elaine mentioned earlier that I gave to Shui when she used the word grammars several times during the interview. This is one of my favorite moments, because the first thing she said was, oh, she didn't like boring grammars, which was basically a knife to my heart because I'm a grammar teacher and I think it's interesting. But so we had a long discussion about grammars. Elaine and I have presented on this interaction so many times, and teachers keep coming up with novel ways of interpreting and explaining it. It's just fascinating. So you're welcome to look at exercise 5.3 on your own sometime and see what you think about this. In applying all these analytical approaches to our learner language samples, we found some things that we expected, of course, like native language transfer and possible avoidance. And then we found some really fascinating aspects that we didn't predict our tasks would elicit. And that's what I want to share with you next. I want to show you a little bit of the jigsaw and comparison tasks in which the learners interacted with each other. Rodrigo and Antonio, again, not their real names, are the lowest proficiency learners in the group, and they had been in Minnesota about a month at the time of the videotaping. So we were quite concerned about whether they would be able to complete some of the tasks. And as it turned out, something very interesting happened. First, we're going to look at a little bit of the jigsaw task where they're trying to find 3 things that are the same and 3 things that are different about the houses in the photos. And as we watch, I want you to pay particular attention to their vocabulary and their body language as they complete the task.
This house, there are 4 windows, and there is a 1 tree in front. There is a grass garden. this house is white. There are 3 windows and 2 doors. There are in front a street and a small garden, and back.
Oops,
maybe-
sorry, I need to pause that. So you probably noticed from that video snippet, as we did, that their vocabulary is simple, their sentences are simple or compound, clauses joined with and they don't look very interested. After this, they did the comparison task where we asked them to answer the questions on the screen. Who do you think lives there? What do you think their social class is? What do these kinds of houses tell you about American culture? And we realized that the concept of social classes might be difficult to talk about even for native speakers. So we really wondered what would happen. So as you watch this video, again, notice their body language and their interaction.
This house show the or power money. I don't know. This house show are very money, and this house no. This house is a good house, but is better this house, and in our world, in Mexico, in United States, and other countries. Yes, I am is show different classes, different social classes. It's in United States, it's the same in other countries.
So first, the thing we noticed is that they look much more engaged in this more complex task. They're leaning forward, they have more facial expression. And although it was quite difficult and might have been impossible for one of them to complete alone, they scaffold each other to say that there are different social classes in every country. Think about what happens in the mind of Rodrigo when he's struggling to, or can't remember the term social class. I mean, he's heard it, I asked it in the question, but he's really stuck. Antonio, his brother, is pretty patient, and he kind of rolls his eyes and finally provides a recast as a scaffold, classes. And somehow that triggers a link in Rodrigo's mind to construct the full term social classes. And then he goes on to assure everybody who's listening that all nations, not just the United States, struggle with economic disparity, even though he doesn't know that term in English yet. So this was just a great example of how a more complex task elicited more complex language, more engagement, and this wonderful example of scaffolding between the two learners. In addition to that scaffolded co-construction of social class, we also saw when comparing the language features used in the two tasks, that the task itself had an impact on the complexity of the learner's sentences. In the jigsaw task, these two learners produced only simple or compound sentences, but in the comparison task, they produced complex sentences as shown on the screen. They both used the verb show to indicate the inferences they had made. And this impact of task complexity on sentence complexity was true for all the learners. They all produced more complex sentences in the more demanding comparison task. So these are just a few of the language features we explored. The videos and transcripts are all available. There is so much more that teachers in training could investigate. For example, could measure fluency. That's not something we talk about much in the materials, but one can do it. Does it vary by task? Does it vary by interlocutor? What communication strategies do the learners at different proficiency levels use? There is so much more to look at there. Elaine, dear, you're muted.
I would just add that if you are teaching a second language acquisition class, or if you're a graduate student looking for a little SLA project to do, our website has a lot of data that is unpublished in any other way, and that you could design all kinds of little SLA studies using the data that is in the public domain now on the website. And I would be very interested, I know Bonnie would, very interested in knowing what you find, because we have only hit the tip of the iceberg in the examples that we chose. These are things that leaped out at us when we were designing the materials. We know there's a lot more going on in the data that is so far unexamined. So I'm just going to add that.
Thank you. So visit our site, use the resources, get in touch with us. And I think unless Elaine has something else to add, it's time for questions.
I would just suggest that we go to the site, because in answering the questions, we might want to hop
Okay.
into one or another chapter or whatever. Okay,
Okay.
Kate, can you preside over the question?
I sure can. So we don't have any questions in the chat yet, but I have a question. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some ways you envision this being used in an actual course. Like what would this, how could we use it during in-class activities? How could we use it? You mentioned sort of lecture versus lab. Could you
Yeah.
elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, every chapter at the end of it has a short bibliography that consists of standard SLA textbooks that cover the material in that chapter. So if you are teaching an SLA course, and Bonnie, you could click on any of the chapters 2 through 7 to see that we rely fairly heavily on Lightbound and Spada, which is, if you're using that book in an SLA course at all, we are closely tied in many ways to the content of that SLA class. Bonnie, as you can see, is scanning.
There we go.
Here we go. So this is Rod Ellis has a chapter on error analysis, Ellis and Barcusen, Gass and Selinker. These are standard SLA texts and have been for a long time, and we can certainly update them as we find others. But as we were saying earlier, these books talk in general terms, in abstract terms. They present the results of studies as if the studies, with no detail on how the data were collected or who the learners were in any way. And what we're trying to do is to supplement that by giving teachers to be and researchers to be some sense of walking through the process of how it feels to gather the data, transcribe it, analyze it according to one approach or another in order to answer questions. And instead of, I mean, what do you do when you've done that? You could publish it, submit it for publication, hand it in your SLA class, or you could use it as a teacher in the way that we have tried to illustrate in order to decide what you're going to teach next. It has been argued in the past that SLA courses don't seem very relevant to what it is teachers do on a daily basis in class, and we're trying to disabuse that notion.
I have used this in my SLA class multiple times, and I typically taught that class with the main text being the Lightbound and Spada, second language learning. And a lot of the chapters, as Elaine pointed out, our chapters are tied to their chapters. So we can walk through how do you do an error analysis? What are the
Right.
difficulties that with that?
Right. For example, just the very first question is, what's an error? I mean, in the SLA text, it's presented as if that's a no-brainer. Of course, we all know what an error is, but that's not. It's not a simple thing to know what's an error. And so, and there's no better way to learn about how complicated that is than to try to go through a transcript and pick out what's an error and what's not an error, and then debate it with your fellow classmates who may not agree with you. So it allows us to bring SLA research into the real world of real people and real issues that teachers need to deal with, I think.
Yeah, and I'm one of those SLA teachers who had teachers in training go out and find a learner to work with to do a project in class, and discovering the difficulties of that. Either they don't know anybody who's learning a second language, they do something that they ought not do to get somebody to help them with their project. And so this is a way of providing teachers in training in a class with as close to a real learner as they can get, somebody you can kind of develop a crush on because they're so wonderful to listen to and to look at. They're so brave to share their language with us. We really appreciated them. And it's just so much more real than, you know, a 2 or 3 line exchange in an SLA textbook. Um, I, yeah, I just think it's great.
Of course, we're biased.
I have a follow-up question that kind of came to me while you were talking, and that is about the language of the videos. So, you know, I teach French. I don't teach ESL, and often when I teach, you know, I do teacher professional development, or when I've taught SLA in the past, it's been to teachers of world languages as opposed to teachers of English as a second language. So could you talk a little bit about the transferability of the videos in particular to world language teaching contexts? Like, how would you advise someone like me to use those videos with teachers of French, German, Chinese, whatever?
Well, it's a human brain in all cases that's adding another language to one that they grew up with and that they already have. So these same issues apply across the board. I make errors speaking French. I make errors speaking Spanish. Um, some of these tasks I would have a great deal of difficulty performing in Spanish, my second language. It is encouraging to me that the sample we gave you, that these learners were successful in communicating so much with so little of the second language. And I find that as a language learner encouraging. It encourages me because I can say, even though I'm just a beginner, even though I tend to be critical and think I don't know very much of the language, that doesn't have to stop me from trying. And I may be successful in getting fairly subtle messages across. I mean, what Rodrigo was saying was, you have asked me to criticize your culture, and I am doing that, but let me assure you, all cultures have this same issue of economic disparity. That's very subtle. Now, he is a human rights lawyer. And so, I mean, I think this issue is near and dear to his heart. But I think that when we want to say something that's important to us, we can make simple, concrete vocabulary work for us to get fairly complex adult messages across. So, I mean, I just think there's a lot of parallel here. And I would, you know, the great advantage of using English as the second language is it is one of the most commonly taught second languages in the world, and it's very handy for illustrating a lot of the dynamics that we know takes place whenever anybody is learning any second language. We'd be happy to consult and answer questions if people have specific questions about specific issues.
Just let me follow up on that for a second. There were a set of videos of learners learning Farsi at and things like that. Elaine, do you remember those? And
No.
maybe Karen?
Karen just put in the chat some examples from the Learner Language Project at CARLA.
Thank you.
So
That's
yeah,
what I
there
was
are
hoping.
other languages that exist. Yep, but videos, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was remembering.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah,
Karen.
yeah.
So some of these same activities could be done with those videos, right? Like there are puzzles I guarantee you there are puzzles that are very similar
Mhm.
in those videos. Think about.
So we have a question from Adolfo that's been upvoted by another participant in the talk today. And the question is, do you have any thoughts on whether newer lenses for analysis might offer different takes on the types of interlanguage you initially observed? I'm thinking, for instance, of translanguaging and whether this or other concepts might offer other ideas about the language samples.
Oh, absolutely. And I would love to get into the language samples and analyze that from a functional point of view as well. And I've certainly thought about um, how the translanguaging lens would add to what we have here. And we would love to hear from people about their ideas for other ways of analyzing the language. We kind of did what we had space for at the time, but yes, there are many ways that this could be looked at.
Maybe it's possible that this site could add contributions from people who see that they could be supplemented.
Sorry, Elaine, could you repeat that? Somebody did.
Yeah, it may be that we'd really like to see if people have ideas on other activities that might incorporate constructs such as translanguaging. And I think this site could grow. It doesn't have to be static as long as there are people who are willing to spend time looking at proposed additions and sticking them in there.
That question makes me think about theoretical orientation too. Like, I get the impression that this book is sort of theory neutral. Is that a correct assumption?
It's neutral about everything except the existence of learner language, interlanguage. Interlanguage exists, and it's not enough to just teach in a class and then test on a standardized test.
Right.
I've had, when I've submitted papers of my own for publication on interlanguage, to have reviewers say, why are you looking at learner language in the classroom? Just look at their test scores. It's like, no. What you get from these learners on a test is going to be very different from what you're getting in unrehearsed interaction. And as a teacher, I care about both, right? I want them to get good scores in the test. But the reason that people take language, maybe just I want to ace the test and move on. Mostly they want to be able to use the language to communicate. And we need to enable our students to do that, not just pass a test.
Yes, and we're trying to see them as people, which is another thing that the translanguaging perspective would bring, and that would be, we would appreciate hearing from people with that perspective. But what you see in SLA textbooks is often language that is not only taken away out of context, but it's sort of taken away from the speaker too. It's like you don't get any feeling for who these learners are. And with these materials, you see them and you hear them and you know something about them.
Yeah, I asked the question because I was thinking when I used to teach a SLA class a long time ago that was organized by different theoretical perspectives. So there was like a chapter, I think it was the Miles and Huberman or something like that. There was like a chapter on generative approaches. There was a chapter on interactionist approaches, a chapter on sociocultural theory, and so on. And I was thinking it could be really interesting to work with those videos using different theoretical lenses to analyze the data or to think about, like, I mean, interaction is obviously really key in that one example you showed us. And so, how could we account for the importance of interaction for scaffolding this if we're taking a generative perspective on SLA, and where are the gaps in the theory? Where can other theories kind of make up for this? So it's kind of got me thinking about that a little bit. Yeah. Okay, so there's a comment in the chat from Tracy who says, I teach Japanese at an art college, so my students are not the typical college student. I love pulling their personal experiences, home language, and more. Sometimes I feel very different or looked down on a bit from other Japanese language teachers around me because I really focus on my students rather than passing a test.
Good for you.
Yeah,
You're doing
that's
the
exactly
right
what I was going to say.
thing. You should not feel looked down upon at all. I mean, I think if you're not teaching your students, what the heck are you doing?
Yeah. So Tracy writes back and says, thank you. I feel seen. So, yeah. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. So, oh wait, here's one more comment from Adolfo. I think one idea that comes up to me for using these materials is using them as a starting point for lessons on multiculturalism from the scope of globalization. In thinking about how little we knew about other cultures prior to social media, the perspectives and language used from the learners in your samples may help class lessons focusing on a shift on cultural lenses. That's an interesting take. Yeah.
Yes, that would be very interesting. And I would be very interested in someone who knows Chinese culture very well, to look at the interviews and the way the two Chinese learners portray themselves. Also, the African students, um, um, how does their culture affect their approach to learning?
Mm-hmm.
One of the Chinese, in fact, the one that we saw with the grammars, she's very proud of herself. She says she's the #1 student in her class. She's very competitive, very competitive.
She also said that they were forced to learn English because of China's economic situation and entry into the World Trade Organization and the Olympics that were going to be in Beijing in 2022. So she was very conscious of the world situation and her own position in the culture as a as a learner of English, I should say.
Well, there's an idea for a research project. Elaine was suggesting that folks use this data. It's open and available. So there's an idea right there.
It is. I'd love to read anything, any research that's done with this data, fully support it.
Okay, so there's another comment in the chat. I'm currently making a lesson plan for the next 2 weeks. This is Tracy again, the Japanese teacher. My brush calligraphy teacher will be on campus for 1 week as a special visiting artist. My students will interview him when he's here. So this week they'll watch him on a TV show with Lady Gaga in 2013 doing an art project, then read his blog post after meeting her. My students will use that to make their own post about someone they admire. So another way to kind of think about using these learner videos.
What a wonderful project.
Yeah.
Yes, that sounds so creative and engaging.
Yeah. Okay, well, so that's it for the comments in the chat. I want to thank Bonnie and Elaine so much for sharing this project and for allowing CARLA to publish it. We feel very honored to be able to have this as part of our collection of resources. Did you guys have some final thoughts you wanted to share?
I am just delighted that it's online. I think it always had a kind of a stunted development being in a book. It didn't work so well. I'm very curious to see how it's going to be working now that it's up online and people have access and really understand that the materials are meant to be worked with. And I think this medium is going to make it much easier to work with the language samples.
I would also add that we were kind of pushed by the publisher to put an answer discussion section in the book. And we always felt that there were way more questions than answers. And it's a starting point. It's not an ending point. There's just so much discussion here to be had. And we would love to hear from people who use the materials in different ways or use the materials in the way we did, but come up with different answers and questions. And yeah, just the discussion is something we look forward to.
Well, I appreciate sort of this openness regarding the project and also your focus on language learning as an asset and learner language as an asset rather than thinking about it from a deficit perspective, which I think we did for such a long time when we talked about learner language. So thanks to both of you for being here. Thanks to everybody who attended today. We are recording this and we will post the recording up on the CARLA website in the coming week or so. Thank you so much for participating in the CARLA presentation series, and we'll see you next semester, if not during our summer institutes. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie and Elaine.
Bye-bye.